Hello everyone, I'm JG and welcome back to Music Forever, where today we're reviewing the new self-titled album from the Stone Temple Pilots. The last few years, really the last part of this decade really, since the release of their last album, which was also a self-titled album in 2010 if I'm not mistaken, have been a really turbulent time for the Stone Temple Pilots. Mostly just vocalist problems really at first. After Scott Weiland left the group following that album, and of course he unfortunately passed away in 2015, kind of assuring that he'd never perform with the Stone Temple Pilots again on another album. And then there was a period of time where they had Chester Bennington of Linkin Park doing some vocals. They released an EP with him back in 2013, I believe. And then unfortunately he left the group as well to focus on his work with Linkin Park, and then unfortunately he also passed away last year, kind of confirming that he'd never appear on another Stone Temple Pilots project. So that's, two singers down in a really short amount of time for this group. And so the group recruits a new vocalist, Jeff Gutt, I believe that's how you pronounce his name, and he holds his own here on this project, I guess, is what I'm trying to get at. I don't think he's quite as interesting as either of the past two vocalists, but I still do think he's able to hold his own here on this project. He's able to show off some nice vocals here and there throughout this album. There are a few moments where he does sound a bit generic, just kind of a bit of a generic post-grunge, grunge kind of singer sound, but I feel like maybe that's just because he's getting adjusted to performing with this group, and I think that in following projects, if he sticks with this group, he'll be able to really come into his own on following albums if he keeps up what he's doing now, because his performance on this album wasn't something I was too crazy about at first, but it grew on me with repeated listens, and I think overall he's a good match for this band. I think he's an appropriate singer for this group. He matches the sound of the instrumentals pretty well. It's overall a pretty decent choice for a replacement singer, in my opinion. Why I feel that this album works very well as a self-titled album, even though their last album was also a self-titled album, is because I feel like this album is a kind of redefining album for this group. Not necessarily because they do anything all too crazy with their sound or try to position themselves as something that they have never really done before, but more or less because they're trying to redefine themselves in this time after these many turbulent years with a new vocalist, but kind of showing that they still have the same Stone Temple Pilots sound, I guess you could say. And overall, the sound of this project, it does have some more of those grungy, heavier moments thrown throughout it, but there's also a lot of more slower, more laid-back, more introspective moments thrown throughout this thing as well. Particularly, a good amount of tracks seem to be reflecting on some of these turbulent years that the band has been through recently, including the loss of their lead vocalist and other problems among that. And I do like some of these more reflective tracks that are a bit slower in their pace. I just really like the introspective nature of them, and I think overall they work pretty well in that regard. Tracks like The Art of Letting Go and Finest Hour are some of these tracks, and I feel like they're definitely some of the highlights that you should check out from this project if you just want to hear some of the best that this album has to offer. Now, as far as some of the heavier tracks on this thing go, some of them are pretty good overall, though some of them also feel a bit decent at times. I feel like these are the parts of the album that are a bit, filler-like to some extent, though there are some good cuts thrown in there as well, like the track Roll Me Under, which initially when I heard it, didn't really do much for me when I heard it as a single. I just thought it was kind of average overall, didn't really return to it all that much, but hearing it in the context of this album, it has grown on me a fair bit. I think it's a decent song overall. Not one of the Stone Temple Pilots' best tracks, but still a decent song through and through. The two tracks that open up this project, Middle of Nowhere and Guilty, are also two of the other tracks on this thing that I think are some of the better ones. I think it's just a pretty solid start to this album overall, and it's a very good transition into this new era of the band. If you're unfamiliar, if you didn't hear any of the singles leading up to this thing or anything like that, if those were the first two tracks you heard, I think that they're pretty solid, more straightforward tracks that are pretty enjoyable through and through. I also like some of the other laid-back tracks on here, like Thought She'd Be Mine, which I think is a more relaxed song, and for that reason I enjoy it pretty well. And then the closing track as well, I think, is another solid cut on here, and it's a nice way to close out the album overall. While this album definitely has its highlights, it also has some lower points as well, which are just mostly, some more forgettable filler-like tracks. Not really any tracks that are downright terrible or anything of that nature, but just some tracks that I don't really care for all too much. They're just kind of forgettable. They just didn't really stick with me all too much. And if there's any other complaint I'd have about the project, I just feel like some of the the guitars could sound a bit heavier on here at times, especially on some of those grungier tracks. I felt like the guitars were kind of holding back a bit at times. Either that or the mixing didn't really make them sound all that heavy and just hard hitting like I felt like they should have been. This isn't really a problem for some of the more laid back tracks and some of the more introspective tracks. I really don't need that. But at the same time, as far as the heavier, more grungier, straightforward tracks go, I felt like they were missing a certain punch that they needed to have to really, stick the landing 100%. But still, some of the tracks still managed to stand out despite that. So overall, this self-titled album from the Stone Temple Pilots is a pretty decent one in my opinion. I really don't think it's one of their strongest efforts. I don't think it's, a great album overall, I would say. But at the same time, it's not a bad or even an awful album either. It's just kind of good, but not exactly stellar or anything quite like that. But then again, given what this band has been through the past few years, the vocalist change-ups, all of that, I'm surprised that it managed to be as good as it is overall. I do really feel like some of the more laid-back moments on this project are the strongest ones, the more introspective moments as well, just because I like to see the band reflecting on these past few years, really. And I just feel like the production, the sound of the guitars, all that complements the more laid-back tracks on this thing a lot more than the more, straightforward grunge tracks, which while there are some decent ones on here, I feel like at times more of those fall flat than, the more laid-back tracks. But yeah, I think that this is a decent project overall. I think the vocalist change-up that they have here, their new vocalist, is pretty solid overall. I don't think I like him quite as much as the previous two, but I think he still has potential to really come into his own here on this band and make a great album with them, potentially, as well. He provides some great hooks on this thing. His voice definitely shows potential, and I'm excited to see what this band is going to be doing in the future, just because I feel like after this album, after they kind of get used to playing together, for the first album, really, I think from here, as long as they're not, changing all too much up going forward, they should be able to, improve the quality a bit more, I feel. But overall, if you're a Stone Temple Pilots fan, if you're just a rock fan, chances are you might like at least something from this. Especially if you are a hardcore Stone Temple Pilots fan, you're going to probably listen to this thing, and you're probably going to like the more introspective tracks, just hearing about them talking about the past few years and some of the struggles that they've been through. But if you're not really a rock fan, if you're not really a Stone Temple Pilots fan, I really don't think that this album is going to change all too much up for you. So really my final recommendation is check it out if you're a Stone Temple Pilots fan, maybe if you're just a general rock fan as well. But other than that, it's just a good album overall, I would say. Yeah, and if you enjoyed this review, I'd greatly appreciate if you'd leave a like and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss out on future album reviews and other music-related content. Thank you for watching, guys, and stay golden.